Hello, Lizzie here. Today I'm going to show you how to make the Thalia bag, which is absolutely gorgeous. This is the one you can see in the picture. Now I've made this one from tweed, but you might want to make it from some other sort of wool fabric or even quilting cotton. It's faux leather, how fabulous, but it's entirely up to you, obviously, what you use. I've got a couple of different techniques actually written in here, so it's suitable for faux leather and fabric as well, and I've given you both instructions. So actually in the pattern itself, once you download that, is that you get full written and pictorial instructions, so everything is there. I won't show you too much information because you're going to download it, but I'm going to follow the pattern. I'm going to give you a full video tutorial, but let's have a quick look around the bag and see what you think. So this is her, this is Thalia. She has two little clasps at the back to put your strap on, and this is an adjustable strap, so you can make it to fit you, which is always good, isn't it? So those are there. So hardware, you'll need to get some hardware. At the front here, we've got a nice big long flap here that has that faux leather trim going across there. Now you don't have to use faux leather, you could use a ribbon or maybe some binding. It's entirely up to you, or leave it out completely. The idea is that you make it yours. I've put a really beautiful big button here in the center, and this thread here you can see is actually some of the thread that I've taken out of the tweed, and the sample I'm going to do today in the video is I've done exactly the same, so it kind of all matches. It has a magnetic clasp at the front, so that's in there as well, so that's nice and secure. It's really roomy, and it's got a big pocket right at the back as well, a double pocket, so you've got somewhere to put your phone. I've certainly found over the years that if you don't make put a pocket in a bag, you really can come unstuck with trying to find things like your phone, which has now become really important to us. At the side we have magnetic clasps as well, so that opens up the bag, so it actually makes it quite roomy. So both sides you've got that magnetic clasp. Now you can decide whether you put the magnetic ones in, or you could use like a press stud or a popper of some sort, or nothing at all. You could just have that pleated and pressed, so that kind of makes it nice and compact. It also gives a lovely finish to the side, and it goes fully rounded here. There's no gusset at the bottom, so it's a lovely shape, very tactile. So this is Thalia, and I'm now going to show you how to make her. So I've cut all my pieces out ready. So we've got, if I put those pieces there, I've got the main body of the bag here in this gorgeous tweed, and I've put the foam stabiliser on the back. So for those of you in the States, you need some sort of wadding that has a sticky back to it that you can iron on, heat set, so it's glued down. It's always useful. Now I always cut my foam back by about 1/4 inch. You don't have to, that's just me, that's what I do. For those that are in the UK, I've used a Fleecelina H640 stabiliser to make my bag that little bit more rigid. It's not quite as rigid as real foam, but it gives some sort of shape and stability. I've cut the flap out of the tweed as well. I've done the same with the lining, so let's get those pieces in. So there's my lining pieces, and again we don't need to put any stabiliser on that whatsoever, except for the flap. So I'll just tell you about that first. So the flap is obviously this shape, and I've put a little tiny piece of stabiliser on the back just here where the magnetic clasp is going to go. I use pinking shears to cut my shape out. Let me just show it here. So I use pinking shears to cut my little shape out. I've done a little circle. If you do a square, it's kind of more rigid and you might feel it, but I cut a sort of an ovally circly shape and use my pinking shears, and makes it a softer edge, and that's for when I put my magnetic closure in. Then I've cut my gussets, so here are my gussets, and again I've got one to actually iron down so you can see how I tackle this sort of thing. I've already pressed one, so that's stuck to that, so that's all prepared, and I've also cut my pocket piece as well to go inside the lining. Now you might want to do the pockets in the same fabric as the lining. I like to use my tweed wherever I can, or you could use a wool. We've already talked about what else you can use. I've cut my 2 pieces of faux leather for the tabs to put my hardware on. Now in the instructions it will tell you to cut a different size if you're using fabric. With faux leather I just put edge to edge, so you need a smaller width of faux leather. I've cut the strip that goes across the front. It's all the instructions are there, the sizes are there, and I've also cut the strap, and again it's slightly smaller in width than you would if you use fabric, and all will become clear as we go along. So all my pieces are ready. So and also I've got a selection of buttons, because at this stage I really don't know what I'm going to use, and as we go through we can decide which button to use. But I've picked buttons that really work well with the fabric, and I've also chosen a really sort of natural one out of wood, so we can decide if that's the one for us. I've got the tools that I need to put the magnetic closures on, a hole puncher and a mat to take the pressure of the punch, and also it means that I don't damage my table. I've also got all the magnetic closures here, and because they're magnetic they're all stuck together so you can see a little clump of those. I've got two rectangles which go onto the back of the bag to take the tabs, so you need two of those. I'm using silver throughout, and then you need a slider for your actual strap itself. But everything is written down in the instructions, there's nothing missing, so there's no guesswork. Now I'm going to work through my pattern as if I was at home myself making this, and that'll be easier for you as well if I follow that, and hopefully it'll make some sort of sense. So the first thing I'm going to do is show you how I put my stabilizer on. So it's like it's kind of foamy, it's kind of fleecy, something in between, and it's got the glue dots on the back. And I'm just, because it's tweed, there's no right or wrong side, which is always handy. So I'm going to bring in my ironing mat. Now the actual tweed itself will take the heat of the iron, but with this particular stabilizer you need to hold that iron down for 15 seconds. Now that's quite a lot, and I would be quite nervous about doing that. Well, certainly you couldn't take it on this side, and it'd probably be okay on the tweed, but I really wouldn't want to risk it. Tweed is far too precious, too expensive. So what I do is I lay my stabilizer with the glue side down onto my fabric, and I use a piece of cotton, and this is Egyptian cotton, it can be whatever you like, and I put it actually on the fleece side. So I'm not going to go via the tweed, if you like, I'm going on the fleece side, and that heat seems to transfer a lot better. Plus I'm using a wool mat. Now if you haven't got a wool mat, they're really worth an investment, because that heat actually transfers up back into the foam and the tweed, which actually sort of quickens up the process. There's a sort of great debates about whether you could use and whether they're worth it using the wool mat, but in my opinion you definitely need one. It makes a huge difference. So I'm just slowly going across my stabilizer, my tweed as well, and hopefully that'll actually glue all the layers together. Don't press down. If you press down with the heat, it's going to squidge your wadding together, and you lose that lovely loft that you get with wadding. This little iron gets super hot, and I can already see that it's kind of affecting my Egyptian cotton. So I'm going to turn it down just a little bit. It's ferocious, that iron. So we can see now that some of this is stuck and some of it hasn't. So I'll just do that again. In fact, let's go from the tweed side. So this piece I'm doing now is the gusset. So I'll just take my time. Like I say, don't press down, just hold that heat there, and that should then set this onto your fabric. And I always think to myself, if it doesn't stick 100%, by the time you've pressed your bag at the end or during the process of stitching it together, then it will glue it eventually. So don't get too worried about it. Okay, so that's all lovely and stuck together now. And so I'm going to go ahead and start making this up. Now we're ready to move on to putting the faux leather onto the flap of the front of the bag. Now in the instructions, just got it in front of me, it says 2 inches from the raw edge of your flap. Now the flap is a little bit wider than it is longer, so it's the 9.5 inch part of your flap. So let's just measure and make sure we got that right. So that's 9.5 inches all the way along. My leather that I've cut is just a little bit bigger than that. That's fine, it can be the same size. So I'm going to measure 2 inches up. So if I measure 2 inches, it's actually there's a line on the tweed that helps me here to actually measure that. So if I put one of my pins in there, so the bottom of the leather is at the pin mark there. Okay, so I'm going to just lay that across. Now, because this is faux leather, I don't want to pin it. If you're using something else, then obviously you can pin it. So all I'm going to do is actually clip this onto my flap. But I'm lucky because I've got the line of the tweed to follow. If you haven't got that, then obviously you're going to measure all the way along. So the next thing we're going to do is to actually stitch this faux leather in place. Now the thread that I'm using matches the bag, so I'm going to keep that and use that throughout. If you wanted to, you could actually, obviously for this particular bag, you'd choose black or even a contrast like cream or white. It could be quite nice. I've also got a Teflon foot on my sewing machine to make sure that it doesn't stick to the faux leather. You could use a walking foot as well. So let's just get my machine threaded up. So I've increased my stitch length to about 3 because I'm top stitching. You don't have to do that, it's optional. If you want to use a fancy stitch as well, of course you can, that'd be marvellous, but I'm just going to use a straight stitch. I'm stitching about 1/8 of an inch from the edge of my faux leather. And because I'm using that Teflon foot, it really helps me glide across the faux leather. So just take your time, because obviously you're going to have a nice straight line with your stitching, so you don't want that to be wriggly. So I'm just going to go across the top of the leather, put my needle down a bit more, and then come down the other side. And again, if you've got stripes like mine, just make sure that both sides are straight. So I'll just trim this. Trim it a bit straighter. There we go. And you might want to press that, but that's your faux leather installed. Now at this point you may want to put your button on. So I've got several buttons to choose from. And you know what, I really don't know. I might do this last because I can't decide what to use. Don't forget, any stitching you do will come through to the lining and you'll have already put your magnetic clasp on, so think that one through. Probably best to do it now. I can use my threads. I've taken some of my thread out of the tweed ready to stitch, so it's just deciding which button to use. I really like that one. I'm not going to let you choose because it's too late, I'll have done it. But I think that one works really well. Or I could stick to what I did originally. I've got a really big wooden button here, and because tweed is such a lovely gorgeous natural fibre, I think I'm going to go with a wooden button. So I'm just going to go away and stitch that now. So I've attached the button with the threads that I took out of my tweed, but obviously you could use matching wool or thread to stitch your button on with. It looks really lovely. I've done a little bow in the centre just to make it a bit decorative. So it's firmly fastened on. I've actually put a little bit of hot glue as well behind the button to hold it really firmly in place. It's purely decorative, so it doesn't matter whether I've used hot glue or not, but that looks absolutely super. So the next thing to do is actually to do the magnetic closure on the flap. Now the magnetic closure, as I said before, needs some sort of stability on the back, so I put a little bit of iron-on stabiliser there just to make that little part a bit more secure. So in the pattern it needs to be right in the centre and 2.5 inches up from the raw edge of the front of the flap. So I've actually ironed that in place, so just fold it in half, give it a finger press so you get that lovely crease going along, and then obviously you want to measure 2.5 inches up. So we can do that, and I can put a pin in there just so we can see. So 2.5 inches from the raw edge. I'll put a little pin in place. I'm going to put it a little way away because I'm going to punch holes through there. So I'm just going to pop it there, and then I'll do one the other side of my crease line, so I've got it kind of central there. So if you can see that, I've got the crease line going up through the centre and my 2 pins either side. So you can see that's where the magnetic closure is going to go, right in the centre, just there. So I've got a rubber mat that will take the pressure of me using my hole punch. Now you can easily get these online, or you could use a bradawl to put some holes in there. You need to take the metal part, the back part, and where it's got the 2 slits either side, that's where you need to put the hole, so you can mark that with a pen, and that gives you your centre point there. There's a circle that gives you your centre point, which would go exactly on that centre line, 2.5 inches up. And again, you could, as you measure, pop that on there and actually put a pen mark on there. So I can do that. It's the same with the little side slits, so I know exactly where to put the holes. So I'll just mark that through. So the same will apply when you do the gussets as well. Now because this is tweed, that's not going to be so easy to do, so I'll probably just stick to pins, to be perfectly honest. So that's made my 2 holes in my fabric. I can take my pins away now, they're no longer needed. So what we need is that metal clasp, and that obviously goes on this side here, but it's the thin part of the magnetic closure that you'll put on this bit, not the heavy chunky part which is in here somewhere. I've got a magnetic mountain going on. Here we go, let's just split that up. So there's the thick one and there's the thin one, and it's the thin one that you put on your lining. So let's put that to one side. You put both legs through the holes and just give them a push so they're securely pushed through, and then with your backing, the piece we just used, pop that over the legs. Now some people like to put their legs in, some people like to put them out. I like to put them in. So if you can, use your fingers to bend those legs over, or you could use a hammer or something, tweezers, anything to make that, to push them together. There we go. And then what you can do is just give it a little knock so it's nice and flat. So you could use a little hammer. So that's our magnetic clasp put into the flap. That looks really good. So the next thing we need to do is to stitch the flaps together, the front so right sides to right side. So just make sure you get your magnetic closure going over the top of your button. So just pop them together like that. Obviously you can use pins or clips to hold those layers together. So I'll just quickly clip this together. Don't forget, right sides together. You're just going around the 3 sides. There we go, let's get that lined up. And so you're going down the 2 sides and across the bottom of where the front is. Sorry, at the bottom of the front. So just get this all lined up. There we go. The button shouldn't get in the way, even though it's a really big button, it shouldn't get in the way. If I'm going to have any difficulties with anything, it's the magnetic clasp, because that will stick to your machine bed here. So all I'm going to do now is to stitch down here. Let's show you that way so you can see the magnetic clasp. So I'm going across the top, down here and down here, leaving this part open. So I've just changed back to my regular foot. I've taken my Teflon one off because I don't need it at the moment, and I've put my regular foot back on, and I'm going to stitch about 1/4 inch. My stitch length has been reduced to 2.5. So a little back stitch just to hold and make that secure. And you can trim your corners so you haven't got so much bulk there. Just be careful of your stitching. I'll pick up all my bits later. And then just turn this through. You might want to trim all these threads off as well to make it neat. Wouldn't it be fancy with a really bright lining? I was tempted, I nearly did. So then just be careful when I'm going to use the blunt end of my scissors here, but please be careful with this part. You may well have a super duper turning tool, and please use it, but be careful that you don't poke through the corners of your fabric. So there we are. It needs a good press, which we'll do in a second. And you could also top stitch this to make a really neat finish. I might even do that. But that is the flap of the bag made. So now we're going to move on to the main bag itself. So now we've got to the point where we can put the pocket inside the lining. Now that needs to be on the back of the lining. As you look into the bag, it needs to be in the back. So when we look at the piece of lining, which is the same as the front of the bag, we need to put it, well, to be honest, it doesn't make any difference, but it's going to come from one end. So it's 4.5 inches down. So if I use my lovely pins again, just to mark that, you can use a pen and mark it if you want and draw a line. That's always handy. So 4.5 inches down from the raw edge of your lining, and I'm just going to pop a pin in there as a marker. And like I say, you could use a ruler and a heat erasable pen, something like that. So we'll put 3 pins in so I can get it straight. And the pocket doesn't go all the way along. It's not the whole width of the bag. So the next thing to do now with tweed, I could, in my instructions, it's fold over 1/4 inch and fold over again. Now with tweed, that makes it quite thick and bulky. So think about what fabrics you're using. So in this instance, I'm going to turn over once 1/4 inch and then zigzag all that down so it looks really neat. If you're using quilting cotton, then do your 1/4 inch turn and 1/4 inch turn again. In fact, I might just go a little bit bigger than 1/4 inch. And like I say, I'm just going to use a zigzag on my machine. I've got my regular foot, and we're just going to increase that stitch length a little bit. And you're not going to see, with the tweed especially, you're not going to see the stitches, but be aware if you're using faux leather, you will. And again, you'd only want to turn down 1/4 inch. If you're using quilting fabric or, you know, cottons, that type of thing, linens, canvas fabrics, you might want to do the fold and fold again and do a normal regular top stitch. So that's all the way along. So take your threads off so it's neat. Now in the instructions I say to iron the fabric over 1/4 inch, so there's my top edge that I've just stitched, and you cannot see that zigzag. That's the great thing about tweed. Then you need to iron in 1/4 inch all the way around the remaining 3 sides and attach it to your bag and top stitch. Now because again this is tweed, yes, I could steam that flap, but that would take up a bit of time, so I'm going to do this freehand. So I'm going to make sure that my top of the pocket is absolutely on the pin line that I did. There we go. And I'm just going to fold that in 1/4 inch and then just top stitch it as I go. And I'm going to use my pins just to hold all that in place so it doesn't wriggle. A good idea is to actually use the quilting tape that sticks down. So although this does go edge to edge, I'm actually going to turn it under as I go. So again, just bringing in my machine and my regular foot, and I'm just going to top stitch this down. Now you want to make sure that you do a lovely back stitch on this, because you want it to be really strong, because you might put all manner of things in here. So straight down. Once you get near to the bottom, put your needle down if you can, and just turn that bottom edge over 1/4 inch. There we go. So come down the bottom of the bag here and try to keep that all straight. And to be honest, I'm turning over a little bit more than 1/4 inch. We've got the line of the tweed to follow as well, which always helps. And just before we get to that end again, I'm just going to turn over 1/4 inch again. Because don't forget, you got that seam allowance as well when you stitch this bag together. So again, let's just get my pins out now, don't need those in. And just turn that under. Make sure that's nice and straight. Again, a really nice back stitch to hold. You want it nice and secure. There we go. So the next thing we need to do once we've done that, first we'll give it a good press, but also we want to find the center of that pocket and do a seam all the way up, and that gives us then 2 pockets to put all our gadgets and gizmos in, lipstick and all that sort of thing. So I tend to just fold mine in half and give it a fold it in half and sort of give it a finger press. And obviously I'm doing that on the cotton lining so I can see it, and then I'm just going to follow that line all the way down the tweed. You may well want to measure, you may well want to put your pins in there so you know exactly where you're going. Tack it if you want to, but I'm going to do this by eye, and I'm also going to follow the line of my tweed. Again, little back stitch just to hold, and there's our pocket done. So just trim the threads like this, and then just take that away and give that a good press, and then that'll sit beautifully. So now is the time to do our gussets, and we need to put our magnetic closures on these before we stitch this together. That's the ideal thing, but you need to put the back and the front on both pieces, so when we put the bag together they clasp together like that. So that's what we're going to do now. To put them in, you need to come 1.75 inches down from the top and 0.75 inches down from the side. So let's get the handy pins in again. So choose which one is going to be your size, because with the tweed I've got my stripes going in equal dimensions, if you like, through the whole thing. So I want to make sure I keep to that. So let's just put 1 to one side. So it's 1 3/4 down from the top. So I'll put a pin in there. So that's my 1 3/4. I'll put another pin in here. And then all I need to do is measure in 3/4 of an inch from the outside edge. So again, let's put my tape measure there. So that's just there. I'll show you when I've done it. So now my pin is right in the center of where my magnetic closure will go. So it's the turquoise line on my tweed. So I just need to come in 3/4 of an inch from the raw edge, keeping to where the turquoise tweed is. So there are my pins in place, and those pins are right in the center of where those magnetic closures should go. Now don't forget, you've got 1/4 of an inch seam allowance on each side. So if your magnetic clasps are any bigger than mine or even smaller, consider the fact that you've got that 1/4 inch seam allowance there. So you want to make sure that you don't go over that 1/4 of an inch seam allowance, otherwise you won't be able to stitch past it. So bring them in a little bit. So we're going to do the same as what we did with the flap. So I'll bring in my closures. So we need the 2 back pieces, and we need a front and a back this time. So let's get those pieces. There's the front, there's the back. It's handy because they all stick together. And I just need to make the 2 holes. Now obviously with the tweed I can't mark it. I could mark it from the back if I wanted to, but I'm just going to go a wee bit across from where the center of the pin is. I'm just going to go a wee bit either side. The legs will go through. Probably the legs will go through without the holes, but we'll just go for it anyway. And then again here and here. Like I say, these tools are available online. Just look at the Amazon. Just decide if you're going to put the thin side to the back of the bag, then make sure both gussets have it to go into the back of the bag. So this time I'm just going to put my legs through the holes. Just get my pin out of the way. Just remember where your holes are. Certainly with the tweed it's difficult to see. So there's one gone through, so there's the thin side there. So on the other gusset I'll make sure that the thin side is on the opposite side, and then we just put our clasps on the back. And again, I tend to put my legs inwards, but you don't have to. You can put them out. It's entirely up to you. It's a personal thing. I just don't want to feel those legs when I'm feeling the bag. I don't want those little legs you might feel on the outside. So let's just get my tool in and just give that a little bend over. There we go. And like I said, use a hammer if you find that you can't flatten those out. Back of the scissors always helps as well. They're very easy to do, but sometimes they're a little tricky. So there's one done. Again, I'll take my pin out. I'll pop the fat part, if you like, of the magnetic closure. Poke that through the holes. So that's how that looks, like that. And then put the back on. There we go. And again, just use your scissors if you want to, your fingers, whatever is easier for you, just to bend those legs over, give them a squidge so they're nice and flat. So there is our clasps done. And of course, when we close that gusset up at the side, it'll look like that. Okay, so that's all done. So I'm just going to go ahead and do the other one now. While I'm doing that, have a look at this. You can find access to my Gold Club from my website. Sign up and you can connect to my Facebook Live events and join in all the fun my Gold Club members have on a weekly basis. And of course you get free patterns. See my Gold Club video on YouTube for more information. So now I'm going to stitch the gussets to both sides of the bag piece. So this is the bag piece. So what I'm going to do is right sides together with the gusset. If I show you this way, so I'm going to do right sides together with my fabric, and I'm going to come down here, then I'm going to turn my main fabric and come along the bottom and then come up. So depending on your tensions, you may have to adjust the fit of this. So what you need to do is start off with a good back stitch. Be careful of going past that magnetic closure. So when you come down to the bottom corner, stop at 1/4 inch before you get to the edge. And I'm just going to snip into my bag base, just a little snip so it'll go round the corner. I'm going to turn now, and I'm going to bring my bottom of my gusset around. I always like to do a little back stitch there, just 1 or 2 stitches. Come along to the bottom, stop again about 1/4 inch before you get to the edge. Again, I'm just going to give that a little snip in the bag base, not the gusset. And then I'm just going to turn again. And then start off, do a little back stitch again. It gives it a nice reinforcement, and then just come up the other side. Just be careful when you go past that magnetic closure. It also might want to stick to your machine. There we go. So a little bit of trimming to do on this part of the bag, but that's fine. So now I've stitched in both side gussets, the one we first did and the second one, and this is how the body of your bag will look. So the next thing to do, and you can either do this before you put the gussets in or you can do it after you put the gussets in, we need to put that magnetic clasp on the front of the bag, so when the flap comes over it attaches to the other half of the clasp. So what I've done is I've measured, it's 10 inches across, so I've measured into the center, which is 5 inches, and I've measured 5.5 inches down the front of my bag, and I've made a little black mark with my heat erasable pen. I'm going to use my rubber mat, and you can use thick cardboard, this works just as well, and I'm just going to punch a hole either side of my black mark. And I'm going to attach my magnetic clasp. So don't forget to put this part, the shiny part, on the front of your bag. So let's pop that through. And you can see where the holes are, it's quite clear. You get daylight. So just pop those legs through and put the back on. There. So if I turn this through, this is how your bag should look at this stage. There we go. So there's the front of the bag there with the magnetic clasp just here, and the sides should look like this, and those will just come together beautifully when you've put the flap on. So the next stage now is to do exactly the same to the lining. So with the lining, we're just going to stitch both gussets onto the lining, and then we're ready to put the whole bag together. Just got to make the straps up as well. So I'm just going to go ahead and do the lining for you now. So now I've stitched the gussets into the lining pieces so it matches the outer fabric, and you'll see that the pocket sits really nicely on the bottom of the bag. Even though it's a rounded bottom, it sits really neatly. Now in actual fact we need that to be right side inside, so we'll just turn that back. Now the next thing we need to do are the straps and the tabs to take the hardware that we fit onto the bag. So your tabs for the faux leather are 2 inches by 4 inches, and you need 2 of those, and the strap is 60 inches thereabouts by 2 inches, and you can see I've already made the strap up, just got to stitch it. So a great way of doing the tabs, now this is for faux leather. If you're using regular fabric, I would cut a 4x4 piece and I would fold in half and fold again, and that gives you a lovely 1 inch strap for your project. But with faux leather we can't really do that, it's too thick. So I'm using quilting tape, which is a fabulous double-sided tape, and I've put that either side on the wrong side of my fabric. I'm now going to take that white paper off and stick those edges to the middle. Be difficult to see, so just pull the paper away. So you've got your 2 glue strips going down the edges, and if you want to just measure out where the middle is, just do a finger press so you've got a little crease there. Now don't forget, this tape isn't permanent, so you still need to stitch it. So just bring those edges to the middle, and then what you're going to do is top stitch like a channel down the centre either side of your raw edge. You can hardly see it. So we'll do the same for the other tab. So double-sided quilting tape, really useful. There we go. So just press that down so you know it's all glued down firmly, and just peel that top layer away, and again just peel it away, and if it hasn't stuck, give it a little press and then it'll stick. Just take that away, take the paper away, and then again just fold into the center. And those raw edges, they don't fray, so it's lovely working with the faux leather. There we go. So just butt those edges up into the center. Then all we're going to do is top stitch. So I've got my Teflon foot on there again. I'm doing this so this is so I can see the raw edges, and I'm using the guide on my Teflon foot to do a seam about 1/8 of an inch from the raw edge. So there's one tab. I'm just going to run on and sort of chain piece these. Again, I can see the raw edges of my faux leather. So now all I'm going to do is turn that around and go down the other side. Again, using the guide on my foot. There we go. just trim those threads away. Again, I'll pick those threads up later. So now what we've done is top stitch that down. I've used the same thread as the bag, so it's got a lovely mauve look to it. You could use white, that would look stunning. But if we have a look at it there, maybe you'll be able to see the raw edges and how they butt up together. But if we turn it over, it makes a beautiful top stitch on the front of the strap. But this is the tab. So the next thing we need to do is to bring in our hardware. So I've got two rectangles here, two silver rectangles. I'm just popping one of the straps through, and these are inch wide rectangles. So the raw edges are going to go together. So you've got the right sides facing out, and we're just going to fold it so it looks like that. And then I'm just going to stay stitch those two edges together on both of those pieces. And it's far easier to do that now than try to keep all those pieces together when you're actually stitching the bag together. So I'll do the same one. So I'm putting the raw edges together, folding that in half, and that's our next tab. And a stay stitch is about 1/8 of an inch from the raw edge of your fabric. And that applies whether it's faux leather or whether it's fabric you're using, just regular fabric. And again, if it's tweed, I would also try to do the 4-inch strap where you're folding in half and folding again to get that 1 inch, but it's a little bit more bulky. So there we are. So there's our two tabs done, and we can actually pin those into the bag in just a second. Before I do that, I'm going to actually stitch my strap. So that's all glued down. I just need to stitch it down in place. So I'm going to do that now. So I'll just trim my threads, make it nice and neat. Now this piece of faux leather was just about 60 inches long, and I said in the pattern to cut 2 lots of 30, just in case your fabric isn't wide enough or long enough, or you need to piece something together, and then at least the actual seam is in the centre of your strap, which makes it look much better than if it was sort of 2/3 of the way down or something like that. So it's better to cut 2 equal lengths and stitch them together. But fortunately for me, this piece of faux leather was quite wide. I think it's about 58 inches, so that was enough for me. That's still going to make a really long strap. So I'm going to put all this to one side, or at least the strap I'm going to put to one side, because now I need to stitch my bag together. The strap I can do at the very last thing. So this is where we need to put all the components together. Don't forget, always right sides together. Think about your flap and think about where that needs to go at the front of the bag. So if I place it on the front like this, there we go. You can see that's where it needs to go, and it actually has joined up on the magnetic clasp already. It's kind of found itself. And so all you need to do is remember that that's how you want it to be. And oftentimes I will actually do that and then fold it back, so I know that I've got it on the right side. So if I do that, bring it all the way over to the back, I know that's perfectly positioned. Now I'm just going to use my quilting clips to hold that together sort of temporarily. Now there should be around about 1/4 of an inch before you get to the seam line on this. So I'm going to bring those raw edges together. So what we're looking at now is the lining of the flap, and the right side of the bag, the flap with the button is going onto the back of the bag there, and that should then come over and be beautiful. So now all I need to do is to pop the tabs in between the layers there. Even though I've put my flap in place, I've got that in place, I can sort of maneuver around this now. So you need to put the tabs in 1 inch away from the gusset edge. So that's the back of the bag. There's the gusset seam there, and I'm going to bring it in 1 inch into the bag there. So I'm just going to take my flap off there, get my tape measure. Here it is. And just measure 1 inch, and the actual edge of that tab goes against that 1 inch line. So like that. I'll show you when I've done it. And I'm just going to, although I've got the tab in place now, I'm going to also catch my flap as well. So that's 3 layers. If you can see, I've got my tab caught in there, and it's 1 inch from the gusset. I've just caught it into the seam. So if I show you this side, here we go. So there's my flap now attached, if you like, or temporarily attached to the back of my bag. So I'm just going to measure 1 inch in. So 1 inch is here. And I'm going to put my tab edge against that 1 inch. So that's there. And that's how that'll look. Like that. And then I'm going to use my quilting clips and hold all of those layers together. And don't be worried, your machine will go through this fine. And you can pin this if you want to. So that's my layers done. And I would now stay stitch all those 3 layers together, because the next stage is to do the lining and we're actually almost finished. But just to make sure it's all laying flat and I'm not worrying about all these different layers, it's good to actually do that stay stitching. I can get rid of the clips as well then. So I don't need my Teflon foot, so I can put my regular foot back on. I've taken my table away. So I've got less bulk to deal with on my actual table itself. So just open up your bag. And I will start about 1/2 inch away. And so I'm stay stitching now. So you can actually lengthen your stitch if you want to. I've got it on 3 still from top stitching. But just make sure all of those layers catch. There we go. Do the needle down position if you can, because that again secures all your layers. And so this time is probably more than 1/8 of an inch. I'm probably going not quite 1/4 of an inch. And just make sure that all your layers stay together. And like I say, you might want to pin all of these just to secure them. But really what you're wanting to do is just to make sure that all of those layers are secure. So again, just remove that last one there. Go over all my faux leather, right up to the end, and again, back stitch. So I'll move that out of the way, I don't need it anymore. So all I've done is actually just machined all those layers together. So when I open up the bag now, that's what it will look like. It's got the 2 tabs there ready to put my strap in. So the next thing to do is to actually stitch the lining to the bag itself. Now please don't forget to leave a turning gap. So if you've stitched all of the gussets now, you can actually just unpick about 4 inches just to make sure you can turn that all through. So I'm going to unpick a little section and then put my bags together. You could also put your bags together and then unpick a little section. It's not important enough. But don't forget, right sides together. So I'll do the unpicking in just a little while. If you remember, great. If you don't remember, then you can, like I say, just unpick. It's fine. No rules. So right sides together again, just to make sure that that pocket that you put in the lining is going to end up on the back of your bag. So again, you might want to sort of just check that. Now there's my pocket there. So when that folds back in, that'll be at the back of the bag. So make sure your gussets match, your seams of your gussets match, and put a little clip there just to hold. So we've put the lining on the inside of your bag, right sides together. And so now I'm going to stitch all the way around the entire bag. But I'm using my clips just to help me keep everything together. Now this is where I will probably use a good 1/2 inch seam allowance. I want it to be nice and strong. So there's no point skimping. You don't want it to fall apart, especially if you're in the middle of shopping. Right, so that's my 2 bag pieces popped together. So all I'm going to do now is stitch all the way around. So there we are, I've stitched all the way around. So there we are, so there's our bag put together. So all we need to do now is turn it through. So that's where you need that turning gap. And because we turn it through, and you know, you're gonna ruffle this up a little bit regardless of the size of the gap, you perhaps need to actually then steam it so it's nice and neat. There we go. Always looks a bit strange when you first do this. Now that's your turning gap, so you're going to stitch that together. I'll do that in a second. Now you really do need to give this a really good press, because all of these seams will be fighting each other, and they want to all be the one on show, but you want to tell it, like the lining, no, you're going to stay inside. So give it a good press, and you might want to top stitch all the way around so everything stays put. But I would initially press this to make sure that it's really lovely and neat. And I'll go away and do that in a second. So there we are, there's our bag made, and the magnetic clasp, it always finds itself quite nicely there. There we go. So do I, so I can see it. There we go. So that's found that really lovely. And those sides, once we get that press, they'll come together as well, just there, like that. Same with the other side, but I'm going to show you how to put the strap on with the actual hardware. So I'm going to go away and press this, and I'll come back to you. Okay, I've given it a good press. Always makes a difference. And I've actually put the poppers together at the side there. Doesn't it look fabulous? I'm really loving this. I might use this every day now. But of course, you know, you can undo these magnetic clasps and make it bigger. Anyway, let's get on to the slider part. So this is the bit where you need to concentrate a little bit. So a slider looks like that. It looks a bit like a buckle, but without the prong. So you've already done your strap. So let's call the raw edge side, where you can see the raw edges in the faux leather side, is to put the raw edge facing you through the center of one and back up through the other. Okay, so you've threaded it through. Now you need to thread this through so you've got a good couple of inches maybe overlap there. So literally that's what it looks like that. So it's just going through that center part like that. So all I'm going to do is actually stitch those together, just to give it security. I might come in just a little bit. So I'm going to change to my Teflon foot again, because obviously we're using the faux leather. If you're using fabric, you'll just need to neaten the raw edges there. Quite honestly, I would probably just do a zigzag. You can buy metal hardware to actually finish off the raw edges, this part here. So you can probably look for those as well. So I'm just going to do a backwards and forward stitch over here. So I'm going to stitch one way, and then I'm going to just reverse on myself, just to give it a little bit of strength. So I've gone to one side and I've put my reverse on. I'm just going to go over and then come back on myself. So that's 3 times over that, through all of those layers. Now the great thing about using faux leather is there's no raw edges, it's fab. So just trim all those away. You're going to make a good job of trimming that, because you're going to see that. Okay, so there's that attached. Now while that's raw edge with the edges of the seam showing, that's what you're going to keep looking at, and you're going to thread that through one of these rectangles here. So with the raw edge is still facing me, I'm threading it through the other side of my rectangle. So let me show you. So I've threaded it through like that. Okay, so it looks like that. Already I'm excited about this bag. So just bring all that through. So you need to make sure the raw edges, you can still see your raw edges, you've got your good edge on the top here, and then all you're going to do is thread it through the top bar, thread it through again, so it folds over on itself, and that little seam that you just stitched will be in between all of these layers, and you're just bringing that strap down. I mean, this is where, don't worry about the length at the moment, you can adjust that later, but just bring it right down, and you've already got that adjustability straight away. And just make sure that you don't twist anything. Again, pop that through, and then again make it about 1.5 inches. You decide. I'm going to do about 1.5 inches there, and I'm just going to do exactly what I did before. So 3 rows of stitching just to secure that end in place. So again, I've got the Teflon foot. Now I'm going to do it so I can see, so I'm going to flip that over. Keeps it nice and neat. Just make sure those edges are really nicely layered on top of each other, because you're going to see that. So again, I wouldn't backstitch now. Just get to one side and then go back on yourself. So back and then forward. And that's plenty. And I'm loving this sort of purple thread on the faux leather. So again, make sure you neaten all of these threads, like I say, because you're going to see that. So there's a little, there we go, I got it. So there we are, that's our bag done. And of course now I can adjust this so I can make it a lot shorter if I want to. There we are. So there is the bag made. So it's got the hardware on. We've covered the magnetic clasps. That opens up beautifully, and inside we've got the pocket going in at the back there. I don't know if you can see that, but that's going in at the back. The only thing I've got to do is stitch my turning gap. So I'm going to go away and do that now. So I hope you enjoy making Thalia.